The crisp fall air in Sterling Heights, Michigan usually filled me with a quiet contentment, a sense of home and belonging, but not today. Today, the very thought of the upcoming wedding, my son Mark's wedding, sent a shiver of dread down my spine. It was supposed to be the happiest day for a father, watching his boy start a new life. Instead, a dark cloud hung over me, a secret I carried that felt like a lead weight in my gut. I knew what was coming, though Mark certainly didn't. He thought he had everything under control, that he was so clever. He was about to learn that some things, like the love and respect of a father, were not to be taken for granted, and that millions of dollars could vanish just as quickly as they appeared. My name is Arthur Caldwell, and at 58 years old, I've learned that patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. My life here in Sterling Heights has been a simple one, built on hard work and honest living. I owned a small but successful auto parts distribution company, a business I'd poured my heart and soul into since my early 30s. Every screw, every gasket, every engine part represented hours of my life, sweat on my brow, and the dream of providing a good life for my family. After my dear wife, Alina, passed away 10 years ago, Mark became my entire world. He was 25 then, still finding his way, and I dedicated myself to being both a mother and a father to him. I loved that boy fiercely, perhaps too fiercely, because looking back, I can see how my boundless generosity might have inadvertently paved the way for his sense of entitlement. I put Mark through a decent private university, covering tuition, books, living expenses, even a brand new car for his graduation. He wanted to start a trendy coffee shop after college, a dream that fizzled out within a year when he realized how much actual work it involved. I didn't scold him. Instead, I helped him pay off the business loan and encouraged him to find another path. When he found his passion in graphic design, I set him up with a comfortable home office, complete with top-of-the-line equipment. Then came Sarah, his fiancée. She was beautiful, no doubt about it, with a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for luxury. From the moment Mark introduced her, I sensed a shift in him, a preoccupation with appearances and status that he'd never had before. I wanted Mark to be happy, truly, deeply happy, and if Sarah was the woman who made him so, I was willing to welcome her with open arms. I paid for their lavish engagement party, a grand affair at a country club that cost more than my first house. I offered to cover a significant portion of their dream wedding, a figure I knew would raise eyebrows among many of my friends, but I saw it as a final, grand gesture of a father's love. I was supposed to be paying for the catering, the venue deposit, the floral arrangements, and even Sarah's designer gown. I wanted to help them start their life together without the burden of debt. I genuinely believed I was setting them up for success, that I was ensuring their future, giving them a head start I never had. It sounds foolish now, doesn't it? A man in his late 50s still trying to prove his worth to a son who saw him as little more than an ATM, a source of endless funds. But that's exactly how I felt. I just wanted to be appreciated, to be a respected part of their new family. I wanted to feel like my years of sacrifice meant something more than just a convenient funding source. I had visions of a happy future, perhaps grandchildren, family dinners, a bond that would only grow stronger. That dream, however, was about to be shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The betrayal came, not with a bang, but with a whisper. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks before the wedding. Mark had called me earlier, asking if I could pick up a special order of vintage champagne from a boutique distributor across town. He claimed he was swamped with last-minute wedding details and couldn't get away. Of course, I agreed. I always did. My car was in the shop, so I took a lift, and the driver dropped me off at Mark and Sarah's little craftsman house, the one I'd helped them with the down payment on just 2 years prior. I had a key, as I often popped by to fix a leaky faucet or drop off some groceries. I let myself in, calling out Mark's name, but there was no answer. I figured they must have stepped out. Perhaps I'd just leave the champagne in the fridge. As I walked towards the kitchen, I heard voices from the back patio, faint at first, then clearer as I approached the sliding glass door. It was Mark and Sarah. They were talking about the wedding guest list, specifically about me. "He just doesn't fit in, Mark," Sarah was saying, her voice a little too loud, a little too dismissive. I mean, look at him, he's so old-fashioned. And his stories, honestly, they're so boring, all about work and the good old days. It's a modern wedding, we need a modern vibe. My hand paused on the doorknob. My heart gave a strange lurch, a cold, icy feeling spreading through my chest. I thought maybe I misheard her, or maybe she was joking. But then Mark chuckled, a sound that cut right through me. I know, honey. Believe me, I've been thinking the same thing. He means well, I guess, but it's going to be awkward. Especially with your family coming from out of state, all of them so sophisticated. Dad's just not refined enough. Refined enough, me. The man who had sacrificed everything for him, who had worked his fingers to the bone, who had given him every opportunity. I felt a flush of heat rise to my face, then a sudden chill. They were talking about me as if I were some kind of embarrassing stain on their pristine wedding day, something to be hidden or, worse, scrubbed away entirely. I just wish there was a way to make him less visible, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with annoyance. I heard him telling your Aunt Margaret about his latest hernia surgery last week. At a formal dinner, Mark. It was mortifying. And honestly, he'll probably try to give some long, rambling toast, recounting your entire childhood. It'll just kill the mood, Mark sighed, but it sounded more like agreement than exasperation. He already volunteered to do the father of the groom speech. I haven't figured out how to tell him no without him getting all dramatic. Dramatic. My stomach twisted. I remembered standing on that stage at his college graduation, bursting with pride, holding back tears as I watched him walk across, my mind filled with dreams for his future. I remembered sitting with him for hours after a leaner passed, just talking, comforting him. Was that dramatic? Was my love, my concern, my very presence, merely a performance for him, something to be tolerated for the sake of appearances? Then came the words that truly solidified the ice in my veins, the words that would echo in my mind for weeks. Maybe we just don't seat him at the head table, Sarah suggested, a cruel lightness in her tone. Or maybe, even better, we tell him we've had to make some last-minute adjustments to the guest list because of the venue capacity. You know, a white lie. Say he can come to the ceremony but maybe not the reception. That way he can still see you get married, but he won't be an imposition. An imposition. My son, my own flesh and blood, was conspiring with his fiancée to exclude me, to make me unwelcome at his own wedding reception. The reception I was largely paying for. I felt the air leave my lungs, a sharp, searing pain ripping through my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual, dismissive way they said it, as if discussing an unwanted piece of furniture. They didn't even consider my feelings. It was all about their image, their modern vibe, their carefully curated guest list. My mind raced. Every instance of their thoughtlessness, every time they'd called only to ask for money, every ignored birthday call, every time I'd felt like an outsider in my own son's life, all of it crashed down on me. I stood there frozen, the bottle of vintage champagne in my hand, suddenly feeling like a fragile bomb. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to confront them, to demand an explanation. But something held me back. A cold, quiet anger began to simmer beneath the surface, pushing down the immediate pain. I realized that a confrontation now would only lead to denials, hollow apologies, and a further deterioration of whatever semblance of a relationship we had. No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. I wouldn't give them the power to discard me so easily. I would play their game, but I would play it better. I would hide my pain, mask my emotions, and let them believe they had won, that they had successfully relegated me to the sidelines. They wanted me to be an imposition. Fine. I would become one, but not in the way they expected. My world wasn't crumbling, it was simply being rearranged, and I was about to become the architect of its new, painful design. This was no longer about a wedding, it was about respect, and I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget, a lesson that would cost them far more than money. That night I didn't sleep a wink. The words, "he's just not refined enough," an imposition, less visible, played on a loop in my head. I walked through my quiet house, the silence amplifying the betrayal. My calm anger, like a slow-burning fire, began to solidify my resolve. They thought they could discard me. They thought they could take my money and then push me aside like an old broken toy. They were about to learn that Arthur Caldwell was not so easily dismissed. The next morning, I canceled all my appointments at the company and made a series of discreet phone calls. My first call was to Mr. Henderson, my longtime financial advisor. I set up an urgent meeting for that very afternoon. I needed to know exactly what I had, what was liquid, and what could be moved without delay. Mr. Henderson, a man with silver hair and a kind, steady gaze, listened patiently as I explained in vague terms that I was reviewing my entire financial plan, particularly my estate. I didn't reveal the true extent of the betrayal, not yet. He looked at me with a questioning glance, sensing more than I was letting on. "Arthur, you've always been so focused on Mark's future, his inheritance. Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. I simply nodded, a tight smile on my face. "Just reevaluating, Mr. Henderson, ensuring my own security and making sure my generosity is appreciated." He understood. We spent hours going over my accounts. My business, thanks to years of careful management, was thriving. My investments had matured handsomely. What Mr. Henderson revealed to me was staggering, even to myself. I had accumulated far more than I had ever actively tracked, especially in a specific portfolio I had intended to surprise Mark with: a seed fund for his family's future, a nest egg for his children, a legacy from his mother and me. This fund, separate from my general accounts, had quietly grown, almost unnoticed by me, now exceeding $1 million. It was sitting there, ripe for the taking, or, as I now considered, for the withholding. I instructed Mr. Henderson to prepare a certified check for the full amount, payable to me, to be ready for pickup by the end of the week. I told him it was for a large investment opportunity I was exploring. He didn't question it further. The check itself, once written, would be proof, a tangible representation of what they were about to lose. My next call was to a discreet private investigator, a former police detective named Frank Miller, whom I'd used once years ago for a minor business issue. I asked him to run a comprehensive background check on Sarah and a more subtle investigation into Mark's recent activities, particularly anything related to finances or his general interactions with Sarah. I needed to understand the full scope of their character to see if Mark's behavior was simply immature or if Sarah was truly the manipulative force I now suspected. I also needed confirmation of their financial situation. Were they struggling? Were they spending excessively? I wanted facts, not assumptions. I wanted to understand the depth of their greed to measure the potential impact of my planned action. While Frank worked, I continued to play the doting father. I picked up the special order champagne, delivered it to their house with a smile, enduring Sarah's polite but frosty demeanor and Mark's distracted, almost impatient gratitude. I even offered to help with some last-minute errands for the wedding. "Are you sure you wouldn't mind, Dad? It's a lot and we're so busy," Mark said, already handing me a list. I nodded, my smile unwavering. "Not at all, son. Happy to help. It's your big day." Inside, I felt a chilling satisfaction. Let them use me. Let them think I was their clueless benefactor. Every errand I ran, every bill I paid, every favor I performed only added to the weight of their eventual downfall. They were digging their own hole, and I was providing them with the shovels. Frank Miller's report came back quickly. Sarah, it turned out, had a history of broken engagements, each one ending with her significant others in substantial financial distress, though never through any provably illegal means. She was adept at finding men who were financially stable and slowly bleeding their resources dry, always within the bounds of what could be considered gifts or shared expenses. Her credit history was spotless because she never spent her own money. Mark's finances, on the other hand, were a mess. Despite my generous down payment on his house, he had taken out a substantial second mortgage, supposedly for renovations, but a good portion of it seemed to have been siphoned off for lavish vacations and expensive trinkets for Sarah. His graphic design business, which I had fully equipped, was barely breaking even, mostly because he spent more time networking at expensive clubs with Sarah than actually working. They were living far beyond their means, clearly banking on my continued support, and as Frank's report subtly implied, a significant inheritance once I was gone. It was all falling into place. My suspicions were confirmed. My son was not just ungrateful. He was actively enabling a woman who was financially draining him, and they both saw me as a bottomless pit of funds. The week before the wedding was a blur of frantic activity for Mark and Sarah, and quiet, methodical preparation for me. I called the wedding venue and discreetly inquired about the payment schedule. All major deposits were made, including my contributions, but the final balance was due the day of the wedding. Perfect. I also made sure my will was updated, removing Mark as the primary beneficiary of my estate and instead creating a charitable trust for a local children's hospital in Alina's name. I would leave him a modest sum, just enough to not appear vindictive, but not enough to fund his lavish lifestyle. He would not inherit my business, which I decided to sell to my longtime general manager, a man who had dedicated his life to the company. I would be comfortable, very comfortable, but Mark would not automatically be. The $1 million check, drawn on my personal account, now sat in a sealed envelope in my safe deposit box, a potent symbol of their coming shock. I even bought a new, expensive suit for the wedding, something Sarah would approve of, a small, ironic gesture of compliance. Each night as I prepared for bed, I would stand before my mirror practicing a serene, almost detached expression. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My revenge would be quiet, dignified, and utterly devastating. The anticipation was a strange mix of sorrow for the son I had lost, and a burning satisfaction for the justice that was about to be served. They were so confident, so arrogant in their belief that they had outsmarted me, that they were above reproach. They had no idea the storm that was brewing, a storm that would hit them not with thunder and lightning, but with the quiet, devastating force of a single, humble check. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and clear, utterly oblivious to the dark drama about to unfold. The wedding day dawned with an almost cruel perfection. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees surrounding the magnificent old church in downtown Sterling Heights. Guests were arriving, a mix of Sarah's sophisticated friends and Mark's slightly more boisterous crowd, along with a scattering of our extended family. I arrived early, impeccably dressed in my new charcoal suit, a carefully chosen silk tie around my neck. I looked the part of the proud father of the groom, though my insides churned with a mixture of grief and resolve. My heart ached for the father-son relationship that should have been, the one I had poured my entire life into building. Now it was just a husk, ready to be discarded. I greeted guests with a polite smile, nodding here, shaking a hand there, all the while observing Mark and Sarah. They were radiant, undeniably basking in the glow of their big day. Sarah looked stunning in her elaborate gown, her face alight with a triumphant gleam. Mark, my son, looked handsome, his eyes sparkling, a picture of youthful exuberance. They were completely oblivious, wrapped in their bubble of self-importance and perceived success. I took my seat in the front row on the groom's side, exactly where a proud father should be. My brother, John, nudged me. "You look sharp, Arthur. Ready for your speech?" He whispered, a knowing grin on his face. I simply smiled back, a tight, enigmatic expression. "Oh, I'm ready, John, more ready than you know." The ceremony began, a beautiful, traditional affair complete with soaring organ music and fragrant floral arrangements. Sarah glided down the aisle, radiant, and Mark's eyes lit up as she approached. My gaze, however, was fixed on my son, dissecting every gesture, every expression. He looked so happy, so confident, so sure of his bright future. A future he thought he had already secured, largely on my dime. Then came the vows. They exchanged loving words, promises of eternal devotion, all the usual declarations. But as Mark turned to address Sarah, and in doing so subtly addressed the assembled guests, the air in the church seemed to thicken. He began by thanking Sarah's family, then his own friends, for their unwavering support. He even thanked my brother John for being such a great uncle. My name, however, remained conspicuously absent. I felt a prickle of unease from the guests around me. A few covert glances shot in my direction. They knew something was off. Mark continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident, as if he were delivering a grand proclamation. "And to everyone gathered here today," he boomed, "we thank you for celebrating with us. This is the beginning of our new, modern life, free from the constraints of the past, free from outdated traditions and expectations. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the congregation, finally landing on me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, perhaps defiance in their depths. We are forging our own path, a path of independence and progress. We are moving forward, shedding anything that holds us back, anything that doesn't align with our vision of the future. The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Shedding anything that holds us back. Doesn't align with our vision of the future. It was unmistakable. It was a public, cutting dismissal, carefully worded to avoid direct accusation but undeniably aimed at me. He was subtly, publicly, declaring me unwelcome in their new, shiny future. My face remained impassive, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside me. My hands, clasped loosely in front of me, did not tremble. My gaze did not waver from Mark's face. I met his fleeting glance with an unreadable expression, a silent challenge that he seemed to miss entirely in his moment of self-congratulation. Sarah beside him beamed, her hand reaching for his, a smug satisfaction on her face. She had gotten what she wanted. I was publicly humiliated, dismissed, rendered less visible just as she had desired. The vows concluded and the minister moved on to the pronouncement. They kissed, a triumphant, passionate kiss, as if they had just conquered the world. The church erupted in applause, a wave of congratulatory cheers that seemed to wash over my silent, steady anger. But I was not done, not by a long shot. As the ceremony officially ended and the minister invited guests to join the reception, a sudden, powerful impulse seized me. This was it. This was the moment. The check, the symbol of everything they were losing, was no longer in my safe deposit box. It was tucked securely in the inner pocket of my suit jacket, waiting for its grand reveal. The happy couple turned to walk back down the aisle, beaming arm in arm. As they passed my row, I rose from my seat, not with anger but with a quiet, deliberate grace. The movement was subtle, but it caught Mark's eye. He paused, a questioning look on his face, perhaps wondering if I was going to try to congratulate him, to offer a hollow embrace after his public slight. Instead, I simply reached into my jacket, pulling out the pristine white envelope. I held it up, just high enough for them to see, but not so high as to cause an immediate commotion. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, clear, and projected just enough to carry over the murmuring crowd, yet quiet enough to sound almost conversational to those nearest. "Mark," I said, my voice steady. "Sarah, a moment if you please." Mark's eyes, full of the excitement of the moment, narrowed slightly. Sarah, sensing something amiss, tightened her grip on his arm. I slowly extracted the certified check from the envelope. It was a substantial piece of paper, thick and official. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, rotating it slightly so the prominent sum, handwritten in bold, black ink, was clearly visible. $1,000,000. The words, 1,000,000 and $100 and the numbers 1,000,000 practically screamed from the paper. "This," I continued, my voice still even but with an underlying steel, "was going to be your wedding gift. A foundation for your future, a legacy from your mother and me. Something to ensure your independence, your security, and the start of the modern life you so clearly desire." Mark's eyes, which had been confused, suddenly widened, locking onto the check. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly pale. Sarah's eyes, initially scanning the check with a dismissive glance, snapped into focus, her jaw going slack. A small gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled. The murmuring crowd went utterly silent, a collective intake of breath. Everyone was staring, first at the check, then at the frozen faces of the bride and groom, and finally at my own calm, resolute expression. "But," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, each word deliberate, "since I am apparently an unwelcome imposition, an outdated tradition holding you back, and not refined enough for your vision of the future, I suppose you won't be needing this." With that, I calmly, deliberately tore the check in half, then in quarters, the crisp sound echoing unnervingly in the silent church. I then dropped the pieces onto the floor, right at Mark's feet. His eyes, fixed on the shredded paper, were wide with a horrifying disbelief. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Sarah's face contorted, her beautiful, triumphant smile melting into an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. She let out a small, strangled cry, a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Mark started to stutter, his mouth opening and closing uselessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come out. The color in his face was entirely gone, replaced by an ashen gray. He swayed slightly, and Sarah gripped his arm, perhaps to steady him, or perhaps to prevent herself from collapsing. The sheer, visceral shock on their faces was a sight I would never forget. It was a mix of disbelief, dawning comprehension, and raw, agonizing regret. They had been so consumed by their arrogance, so certain of my endless, unconditional generosity, that the idea of me cutting them off, of truly taking away their perceived security, had never even crossed their minds. The applause from moments ago had died completely. The only sound now was Sarah's quiet, desperate whimpering. Mark looked from the shredded check on the floor to my face, his eyes pleading, filled with a sudden, desperate realization of what he had truly lost. But it was too late. The trap had snapped shut, and the consequences of their actions were now irrevocably laid at their feet. The quiet satisfaction that settled over me then was profound, a calm, righteous justice washing over the pain of betrayal. This was only the beginning. The aftermath in the church was pure chaos, a whirlwind of whispers, gasps, and bewildered stares. Sarah's strangled cry was quickly followed by a louder sob, her perfectly made-up face streaked with tears as she stared at the shredded check at Mark's feet. Mark, my son, looked utterly shell-shocked. He stood there motionless, his mouth agape, his eyes darting between me and the scattered pieces of paper. The minister, clearly flustered, tried to interject. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps we can discuss this privately." But I simply raised a hand, stopping him without a word. My message had been delivered, publicly and unequivocally. "There's nothing more to discuss, Reverend," I said, my voice still calm but firm. I then turned and walked out of the church, leaving them to deal with the wreckage of their supposed perfect day. I heard Sarah's hysterical wails erupting behind me, followed by Mark's frantic, desperate pleas for me to come back to explain. But I didn't look back. My work there was done. I could only imagine the scene that unfolded after I left. The wedding reception, I later heard, was a disaster. Many guests, witnessing my exit and the dramatic revelation, chose to leave immediately, sensing the poisonous atmosphere. My brother John caught up with me outside, his face a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. "Arthur, what in the blazes was that?" he asked, his voice low. "That was a father teaching his son a lesson in respect and gratitude, John," I replied without elaboration. He simply nodded, a slow, understanding nod. He knew Mark's character better than most. The immediate consequences for Mark and Sarah were swift and brutal. The wedding itself limped on for a short while, mostly out of obligation for the guests who remained, but the joyous atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by an unbearable tension. The story, of course, spread like wildfire through Sterling Heights. Within hours, everyone knew that Arthur Caldwell, the quiet, hardworking owner of Caldwell Auto Parts, had publicly disinherited his son and ripped up $1 million check at his own wedding. Their carefully constructed image of wealth and sophistication shattered into a million pieces. The financial fallout began almost immediately. Remember those lavish plans for their future that Frank Miller had uncovered? They weren't just dreams, they were heavily leveraged expectations. Sarah had been planning a luxurious honeymoon to Bora Bora, purchased with a credit line that was to be paid off with a portion of my gift. Mark had been planning to upgrade their house, adding an elaborate extension, based on a substantial loan he'd secured, again, expecting me to cover the payments or simply outright fund it. Without that $1 million, their financial house of cards collapsed. The honeymoon was canceled and the deposit lost. The contractor for the house extension withdrew when Mark couldn't provide the down payment. A few days after the wedding, Mark called me, his voice a pathetic mix of anger and desperation. "Dad, how could you do that? You humiliated me, you ruined everything," he screamed into the phone. "Everything?" I asked, my voice flat. "Or just your plan to live off my hard work and generosity while simultaneously shaming me?" He sputtered, then tried a different tactic. "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't mean any of those things. Sarah and we just got caught up in the planning. It was a mistake. Please, Dad, you can't just throw away $1 million. Think of us. Think of your grandchildren." The mention of grandchildren was a particularly galling manipulation. I knew with certainty that any future grandchildren would have simply been another tool to extract more money from me. "Mark," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "your words at the altar were very clear. You want a modern life, free from outdated traditions and expectations. You want to shed anything that holds you back. I took you at your word. Consider this my contribution to your independence." I hung up before he could respond. The calls and texts from both Mark and Sarah continued for weeks, alternating between tearful apologies, furious accusations, and desperate pleas. I ignored them all. My resolve was unwavering. Then came the legal and social repercussions. My updated will, now excluding Mark as the primary beneficiary, sent a shockwave through the family when the news inevitably leaked. The charitable trust for the Children's Hospital in Aliner's name garnered significant positive press, highlighting my long-standing commitment to the community. In stark contrast, Mark and Sarah were ostracized by many of their so-called friends, especially those who had also witnessed the wedding debacle. Their image as the sophisticated, upwardly mobile couple dissolved, replaced by whispers of their greed and Mark's shocking disrespect for his own father. Sarah's family, who had previously been so outwardly supportive, quietly distanced themselves from the couple, likely realizing they had hitched their daughter to a rapidly sinking ship. The house I had helped them with the down payment on. It became a point of contention. Mark was unable to make the higher mortgage payments associated with his renovation loan, and the bank foreclosed. They were forced to move into a small, cramped apartment, a far cry from the luxurious life they had envisioned. Mark's graphic design business, already struggling, collapsed entirely under the weight of his personal issues and damaged reputation. Sarah, unable to find another generous partner, had to take a low-paying job to support them. Their modern life had indeed begun, but not in the way they had ever imagined. As for me, the quiet satisfaction I felt slowly evolved into a profound sense of peace. The initial pain of betrayal gradually receded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had honored my own dignity, stood up for myself, and taught a harsh but necessary lesson. I spent more time focusing on my business, streamlining operations, and preparing for its sale to my manager, Mr. Johnson, a man who genuinely appreciated the opportunity. With my financial affairs in order and my conscience clear, I began to live for myself. I traveled to places Aliner and I had always dreamed of seeing: the rugged coast of Ireland, the ancient ruins of Rome, the serene gardens of Japan. I reconnected with old friends, joined a local hiking club, and started volunteering at the very children's hospital that would now receive the bulk of my estate. I never heard directly from Mark or Sarah again, not truly. Occasionally, a desperate email would arrive, filled with hollow regrets and thinly veiled attempts to reconnect, but they were easily dismissed. I knew the true measure of their repentance or lack thereof. The money, it turned out, wasn't just a number. It was a magnifying glass, exposing the true character of those around me. It revealed loyalty or the lack of it, gratitude or the glaring absence. I learned that while money cannot buy happiness, it can certainly reveal true colors and provide the means to reclaim your self-respect. Looking back, I don't regret my decision for a moment. It was painful, yes. Tearing up that check was like tearing out a piece of my own heart, the part that still hoped for an honest relationship with my son. But it was also necessary. My son and his wife learned a harsh truth that day: that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the respect and love you earn, and that some bonds, once broken by greed and disrespect, can never be repaired. My name is Arthur Caldwell, and I found my justice not in vengeance, but in the quiet, elegant act of taking back what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, reclaiming my own peace. My name is Arthur Caldwell, and I found my justice not in vengeance, but in the quiet, elegant act of taking back what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, reclaiming my own peace. The desperate emails from Mark and Sarah, those sporadic digital pleas, always followed a predictable pattern. First, there would be a wave of furious indignation, accusing me of heartlessness, of ruining their lives, of being a cruel, unforgiving monster. These would quickly morph into tearful apologies, lamenting their past mistakes, blaming the stress of wedding planning, or most often blaming each other. Then came the requests, thinly veiled demands for financial assistance, always framed as opportunities for me to show that I still loved my son, to help them get back on their feet. I would read them, sometimes with a faint sigh, sometimes with a detached curiosity, but always with an unshakable resolve. Each word they typed only served to reinforce the wisdom of my decision. There was no genuine remorse, only regret for the lost inheritance, regret for the comfortable life they had squandered. They missed the money, not the man. The clarity that followed the wedding day was like a fresh, cleansing wind. For so long, I had carried the weight of expectation, the silent burden of being the ever-giving father, the reliable safety net. Now that burden was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt since Alina passed away. The decision to sell my business to Mr. Johnson, my longtime general manager, was one of the best I ever made. He was a dedicated man, a true professional who had poured years of his life into Caldwell Auto Parts, always treating it as if it were his own. He approached the sale with the same meticulous care he applied to our inventory, and the transition was seamless, allowing me to step away gracefully, knowing the company was in capable hands. It freed up my days, my thoughts, my very soul. I no longer had to worry about market fluctuations, supply chains, or employee grievances. My focus shifted entirely to myself, to rediscovering the man I was before the weight of fatherhood and generosity had overshadowed my own needs. The travels I embarked on were more than just vacations. They were pilgrimages of healing and self-discovery. Ireland, with its wild, green landscapes and ancient castles, felt like a journey into history itself, reminding me of a resilience woven into the fabric of time. I walked along crumbling stone walls, stood on windswept cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, and drank pints in cozy pubs, listening to the lilting accents and lively music. In Rome, I marveled at the grandeur of the Colosseum and the Vatican, feeling small yet invigorated by the sheer scale of human achievement. I ate fresh pasta and drank rich, dark coffee, savoring each moment, each new experience. Japan was a study in contrasts, the bustling energy of Tokyo juxtaposed with the serene beauty of Kyoto's temples and gardens. I found a profound sense of peace walking through bamboo forests, contemplating the delicate artistry of a rock garden, or witnessing the quiet dignity of a tea ceremony. Each new country, each new culture, chipped away at the residual hurt, replacing it with wonder and a renewed appreciation for life's vast tapestry. These were places Alina and I had dreamed of seeing together, and though she wasn't physically beside me, I felt her spirit in every breathtaking vista, every quiet moment of reflection. I often found myself speaking to her, sharing my experiences, feeling a sense of shared joy that transcended her absence. Back home in Sterling Heights, my renewed vigor surprised even my oldest friends. John, my brother, who had initially been quite shaken by the wedding day spectacle, became a steadfast ally. He'd often join me for lunches, offering snippets of local gossip, always careful to avoid dwelling on Mark and Sarah. But I knew he was proud of me, proud that I had finally stood up for myself. He'd seen for years how Mark had taken advantage, how Sarah had subtly manipulated. My new routine included regular hikes with a local club, exploring the scenic trails around Michigan. The physical activity was invigorating, clearing my mind and strengthening my body. I found camaraderie with fellow hikers, sharing stories and laughter, none of it burdened by the complex, painful history of my family. My volunteering at the local children's hospital, named in Alina's honor, became a cornerstone of my new life. It was a place of immense joy and heartbreaking sorrow, where the resilience of the human spirit was on full display. I would read stories to the children, play board games, or simply sit and listen to their hopes and fears. Their innocence and courage were a powerful balm to my soul, reminding me of what truly mattered in life. Knowing that the bulk of my estate would eventually support this vital work brought a deep, quiet satisfaction. It was a legacy of genuine love and compassion, something truly worthwhile, unlike the empty promises and self-serving ambition that had driven Mark and Sarah. The whispers about Mark and Sarah continued to filter through the community, as they always do in a small town like Sterling Heights. It wasn't through active seeking, but simply through the casual conversations of people who knew us both. Their descent was as steep and rapid as their previous ascent had been artificial. The small, cramped apartment they moved into was a stark contrast to the comfortable home I had helped them buy, and even more so to the lavish extensions they had planned. Mark, stripped of his perceived inheritance and the prestige of a thriving business, found himself unable to land any significant graphic design clients. His reputation for being unreliable, for prioritizing lavish spending over actual work, had preceded him. The contacts he had made at those expensive clubs with Sarah vanished when his ability to pick up the tab did. He struggled, taking on low-paying freelance gigs that barely covered their rent and basic necessities. The modern life he had envisioned, built on perceived wealth and my unending support, had evaporated, leaving him adrift in a sea of mediocrity he had always disdained. Sarah, too, found her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Her sharp eye for luxury became a bitter irony as she was forced to work a succession of minimum-wage jobs, first as a retail clerk, then as a data entry assistant. Her beauty, once a tool for social advancement, now seemed to draw only pity or scorn from those who knew her story. Her friends, the sophisticated set who had reveled in her extravagant parties, quickly deserted her. They had been drawn to her for the reflected glow of wealth, not for genuine affection. Without the constant flow of money, Sarah's charm withered, revealing a woman devoid of substance, consumed by resentment. There were rumors of constant arguments between them, their once passionate relationship curdling into a toxic codependency fueled by their shared misfortune and mutual recriminations. They were trapped together in the wreckage of their ambition, each blaming the other for their downfall. It was a bitter, self-inflicted imprisonment. I heard through John that they had even tried to sell their wedding gifts, an act that further alienated them from anyone who still felt a shred of sympathy. The expensive china, the crystal, the silver serving platters, all were pawned or sold online for a fraction of their worth, desperate attempts to stave off the mounting bills. The ironic part was that many of those gifts were from guests who had attended the church ceremony, the very people who had witnessed the public spectacle of the shredded check. It was a public acknowledgement of their destitution, a final unraveling of their facade. Years passed. 5, then 10. My life continued to flourish. The sale of my business had provided a comfortable sum, enough for my travels, my charitable work, and a secure retirement. My health, bolstered by my active lifestyle and renewed peace of mind, remained excellent. I had found a renewed sense of purpose, a deep contentment that came from genuine connections and meaningful contributions, not from material possessions or the hollow pursuit of status. My once quiet house now often echoed with the laughter of friends or the gentle murmur of good conversation. I learned to cook, hosting small dinner parties, finding joy in preparing meals and sharing them with people who truly appreciated my company, not my wallet. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost exactly 10 years after the infamous wedding, I was volunteering at the Children's Hospital, helping a young boy assemble a complex Lego castle. The hospital, thanks to generous donations and careful management, had expanded, adding a new wing, a beautiful playroom, and even an outdoor therapy garden. It was a place of hope, a testament to what selfless giving could achieve. As I walked down a quiet hallway, heading towards the administrative office for a meeting about a new fundraising initiative, I saw them, Mark and Sarah. They were sitting on a bench in the waiting area, looking utterly defeated. Mark was slumped, his shoulders stooped, his once bright eyes dull and hollow. His hair, once impeccably styled, was unkempt, flecked with gray. He wore clothes that were clean but ill-fitting, clearly worn. Sarah, too, was a shadow of her former self. Her beauty had faded, replaced by a gaunt weariness. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap, functional outfit, and her hands, once adorned with glittering rings, were bare. There was a small, fretful child, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, asleep in Sarah's lap, wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. The child looked pale, small, and vulnerable. My heart gave a strange, unexpected lurch. Not of anger, not of satisfaction, but of a profound, heavy sorrow. It was the sorrow of seeing what could have been, the sorrow for the broken bond, the sorrow for the path they had chosen. They hadn't seen me. I was wearing my volunteer vest and my presence was common in the hospital. I paused, hidden partially behind a large potted plant, and observed them. They were arguing in low, hushed tones, the remnants of their bitterness still simmering beneath their shared despair. Sarah gestured wildly towards the child, then to Mark, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Mark simply shook his head, running a hand through his thinning hair, looking utterly helpless. It became clear from their hushed conversation that their child was ill, awaiting a consultation. They were clearly struggling to afford the medical care, perhaps relying on state aid or a charity program. The irony was almost unbearable. They were in the very hospital that now bore Aliner's name, the hospital that would one day receive the vast majority of the fortune they had so cruelly dismissed. The fortune that could have easily covered any medical bills, any future for their child. But they had chosen to discard their benefactor, to embrace greed, and now they were paying the price, a price far higher than any $1,000,000. I watched for a few more moments, a silent observer in the drama of their self-inflicted tragedy. There was no joy in seeing their misery, only a quiet confirmation of the immutable laws of cause and effect. They had wished me gone, wished me less visible, and in doing so they had made themselves invisible to the life of comfort and security I had once offered. The child stirred in Sarah's lap, whimpering softly. Sarah gently rocked the child, her face a mask of worry and exhaustion. This wasn't the triumphant, glamorous life she had envisioned. This was the raw, brutal reality of choices made without gratitude, without respect, without love. I took a deep breath, the sorrow easing, replaced by the familiar peace. I had played my part, delivered my lesson, and moved on. My life was rich, not with material excess, but with genuine connection, purpose, and dignity. I had friends who cherished me, a community I served, and the quiet comfort of knowing I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for the memory of my dear Alina. I had built a legacy based on true values, not on the fickle sands of appearance and self-interest. Without another glance, I turned and walked away, continuing towards my meeting. I did not confront them. There was no need. The lesson had been delivered, and its consequences were playing out before my very eyes. My heart ached for the innocent child, a victim of circumstances far beyond their control, but for Mark and Sarah, there was only the quiet, unwavering certainty that they had forged their own path, a path of independence and progress, shedding everything that had held them back, including the very source of their potential salvation. They were reaping what they had sown, and the harvest was bitter. My peace, however, remained untroubled. I understood then, more profoundly than ever, that true vengeance isn't about causing pain to others, but about liberating yourself from their toxic influence and building a life so rich in genuine fulfillment that their absence becomes a blessing. It's about choosing light over shadow, even when the shadow once held your own sun. And in that choice, I found an enduring, unbreakable peace that no amount of money, or lack thereof, could ever diminish. It was the most valuable inheritance I could ever bestow upon myself. It was the most valuable inheritance I could ever bestow upon myself. That day at the hospital, after seeing Mark and Sarah, I walked away not with a feeling of triumph or vindication, but with a quiet, heavy understanding. There was no joy in their despair, only the profound sadness of a path irrevocably chosen, a relationship shattered beyond repair. My heart had ached for the innocent child, a tiny, helpless casualty of a greed that had consumed its parents. That child, sleeping fretfully in Sarah's weary lap, was a stark reminder of the future that could have been, a future I had once eagerly sought to secure for Mark, for his family, for the grandchildren I had longed to spoil and cherish. But that vision had been discarded, deemed unrefined and outdated by the very people it was meant to uplift. The irony of them being in a hospital built and supported by the legacy of my love for Alina a legacy they had spurned, was not lost on me. It was a silent, powerful testament to the universe's own way of balancing the scales. My steps down the hospital corridor were light, unburdened by the weight of resentment or the need for further confrontation. The encounter, unplanned and unbidden, had merely confirmed what I already knew. Their choices had led them down a desolate path, and my choice had led me to a place of profound peace. My meeting about the new fundraising initiative went well. I felt energized, my focus sharpened by the clarity of purpose that had settled over me in the past decade. The hospital, with its vibrant artwork, bustling playrooms, and dedicated staff, was a living, breathing testament to genuine value, to a legacy built on compassion rather than avarice. I was proud to be a part of it, proud that Aliner's memory was honored not with grand pronouncements, but with tangible acts of kindness and healing. This work, coupled with my travels and rekindled friendships, filled the void that Mark's betrayal had initially left. It wasn't a matter of forgetting the pain, but of transcending it, of building something beautiful from the ashes of disappointment. The years that followed the hospital encounter were marked by a deepening of this hard-won tranquility. My life in Sterling Heights continued its rich, fulfilling trajectory. The sale of Caldwell Auto Parts to Mr. Johnson had been completed smoothly, allowing him to thrive and expand the business, while freeing me entirely from its daily demands. This financial freedom, no longer dictated by the need to support an ungrateful son, was intoxicating. It allowed me to pursue passions I had long deferred. I enrolled in a local community college, taking classes in art history and classical literature, subjects Alina had always loved. It felt like a quiet conversation with her, discovering new facets of beauty and knowledge that we could have explored together. I found immense satisfaction in learning, in expanding my mind beyond the world of engine parts and supply chains. My brother, John, often teased me about becoming an academic, but his eyes held a glint of respect. He knew this new intellectual pursuit was another layer of my personal renaissance. My travels broadened. I journeyed to South America, trekking through the ancient Inca trails in Peru, marveling at the lost city of Machu Picchu, feeling a profound connection to the enduring spirit of humanity. I explored the vibrant markets of Cusco, immersing myself in the rich tapestry of local culture, tasting new flavors, and witnessing breathtaking landscapes. Later, I ventured to Africa, experiencing the raw majesty of the Serengeti, watching herds of wildebeest thunder across the plains, and observing the quiet dignity of a pride of lions. These experiences were transformative, putting my past pain into perspective. My personal struggles, though significant, were but a tiny speck in the grand, magnificent design of the world. Each journey broadened my understanding of life, of resilience, and of the incredible diversity of human experience. I often carried a small journal sketching scenes, jotting down thoughts, feeling more alive and connected to the world than I ever had before. These were true riches, moments and memories that no amount of money could buy, and certainly none that could be torn up and discarded. My friendships flourished, untainted by the shadow of my previous burdens. John and I grew closer than ever, our bond strengthened by shared understanding and mutual respect. We'd go fishing on Lake St. Clair, talking for hours about everything and nothing, enjoying the quiet companionship of brothers who had seen each other through life's storms. I also forged new connections within my hiking club and among my classmates at the college. These were relationships built on shared interests and genuine camaraderie, free from any expectation of financial gain. I learned to cook with more enthusiasm, experimenting with new recipes from the countries I had visited. My dinner parties, once a rarity, became a regular occurrence, small gatherings of friends around my dining table, filled with laughter, lively conversation, and the comforting aroma of good food. There was a warmth in my home now, a genuine happiness that had been absent for far too long, stifled by the weight of my son's entitlement. My work at Aliner's Children's Hospital became an even more central part of my existence. I joined the board of directors, lending my business acumen to help with strategic planning and fundraising. The hospital continued to grow, expanding its outreach programs, touching more lives, bringing comfort and healing to countless families. I saw firsthand the profound impact of genuine generosity, the ripple effect of kindness. There was a young girl, no older than 7, battling a relentless illness, who loved to hear stories of my travels. I would bring back small trinkets for her, a carved wooden animal from Africa, a colorful woven bracelet from Peru, and watch her eyes light up with wonder. Her courage, her unwavering spirit in the face of immense pain, was a constant source of inspiration. It taught me that true strength wasn't about accumulating wealth or wielding power, but about facing adversity with grace and finding joy in the smallest moments. This was the legacy I chose to build, a legacy of empathy and hope, a stark contrast to the hollow ambition that had once consumed my son. As the years drifted by, the desperate emails and calls from Mark and Sarah ceased entirely. Their sporadic attempts to reach out had faded into silence, like echoes in an empty hall. I occasionally heard snippets of their lives through the unavoidable grapevine of Sterling Heights, a fleeting mention from a distant relative, a passing comment from a former acquaintance. Their struggles, I understood, had only intensified. The small apartment had given way to something even more transient, their lives marked by a pattern of instability and increasing debt. Mark's sporadic freelance work had never solidified into a sustainable career, his reputation permanently tarnished. Sarah's attempts at finding a stable job were equally fruitless, her bitterness and resentment making her a difficult employee. Their child, I gathered, had continued to face health challenges, a poignant reminder of the resources they had so casually thrown away. The cruelest irony, perhaps, was that their child's continued need for medical care occasionally brought them back into the orbit of a Leaner's hospital. I never encountered them again after that first time, but I knew they were there, somewhere within its walls, seeking the very care that my outdated traditions and unrefined money helped to provide. It was a silent, unacknowledged loop of fate, a quiet testament to the enduring power of genuine generosity over transient greed. They were receiving, unknowingly, the very kindness they had so vehemently rejected. This knowledge did not bring me glee, but a profound, almost melancholic sense of closure. Their path was set, their lessons learned through hardship rather than through love or gratitude. My own life, in contrast, was filled with vibrant connections and meaningful experiences. I found a deep, abiding joy in the simple rhythms of my days. A sunrise walk in a local park, the camaraderie of my hiking group, the quiet satisfaction of a solved literary puzzle, the boundless energy of the children at the hospital. I learned that true independence was not about shedding family ties for perceived freedom, but about being free from the need for external validation, from the burden of unappreciated generosity. It was about creating a life rich in purpose and genuine relationships, a life where my worth was measured not by my bank account, but by my character and my contributions. Looking back, that moment in the church, tearing that check, was not an act of vengeance but an act of liberation. It was the moment I reclaimed my dignity, asserted my worth, and freed myself from a toxic dynamic that had slowly eroded my spirit. The monetary loss for Mark and Sarah was significant, yes, but the deeper loss was their inability to ever understand true value, to appreciate the love and sacrifice that had been so freely offered. They had chosen a life based on superficial appearances and material gain, and the universe had obliged them by stripping away both. My name is Arthur Caldwell, and I have learned that the most valuable inheritance a man can receive is not wealth, but peace. Peace of mind, peace of heart, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you have lived a life of integrity. The $1 million I withheld from Mark and Sarah found its true purpose, blossoming into a legacy of healing and hope through a Leaner's hospital. My life, once shadowed by the pain of betrayal, now shines with the light of genuine connection and enduring fulfillment. I am content, truly and deeply content. My journey had been arduous, marked by a profound disappointment in a son I had once adored, but the destination, this unshakable peace made every step of that journey worthwhile. I found my liberation not in revenge, but in the quiet, elegant act of choosing myself, of honoring my own values, and in doing so, cultivating a spirit so robust and serene that nothing, not even the bitter sting of past betrayals, could ever diminish its light. And that, I realized, was the most profound justice of all.